My name is Melissa, and I grew up in a typical middle-class family. Mom worked as a nurse, and Dad was a mechanic. We weren't rich, but we had enough to get by comfortably. After graduating from college with a degree in education, I landed a job at a public elementary school in my hometown. My days were filled with lesson plans, finger paintings, and the infectious laughter of children. One Friday evening, my best friend Sarah insisted I join her for a party. Reluctantly, I agreed. I threw on a simple blue dress and headed to the address Sarah had texted me. The party was in full swing when I arrived, the small apartment packed with people I didn't know. "Melissa," Sarah's voice cut through the noise. She appeared at my side, grinning widely. "I'm so glad you came. There's someone I want you to meet." Before I could protest, she was dragging me through the crowd. We stopped in front of a tall, handsome man with dark hair and warm brown eyes. "Melissa, this is Jack," Sarah said, practically beaming. "Jack, meet my best friend, Melissa." Jack smiled and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Melissa. Sarah's told me a lot about you." We fell into an easy conversation about my job, his work as a software developer, and our shared love of old movies. Before I knew it, hours had passed, and the party was winding down. As I was getting ready to leave, Jack approached me. "I really enjoyed talking to you tonight, Melissa. Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" My heart skipped a beat. "I'd like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We exchanged numbers, and I left the party feeling giddy. The next day, I woke up to a text from Jack. "Good morning, Melissa. How about that coffee? Are you free this afternoon?" I replied quickly, and we made plans to meet at a local cafe. That coffee date was the beginning of something special. Over the next few weeks, Jack and I saw each other regularly. We went to movies, tried new restaurants, and took long walks in the park. With each date, I felt myself falling for him more and more. One evening, about a month after we met, Jack took me to a fancy restaurant for dinner. As we finished our meal, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Melissa," he said, his eyes serious. "I really like you. I was wondering if you'd like to be my girlfriend?" My heart soared. "Yes, Jack. I'd love to be your girlfriend." Jack was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner, kind, funny, and supportive. One evening, as we cuddled on my couch watching an old black and white film, I turned to Jack. "Have you told your parents about us?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Jack's body tensed slightly. "Not yet," he replied, his eyes fixed on the TV screen. "I haven't found the right moment. I'll tell them when the time is right." I wanted to press the issue, but something in Jack's demeanor made me hold back. Instead, I snuggled closer to him, pushing my concerns to the back of my mind. The next week, I invited Jack to dinner at my parents' house. Mom and Dad had been asking to meet him for weeks, and I was excited for them to get to know the man I was falling in love with. "Mom, Dad, this is Jack," I said, beaming as we walked into the living room. My parents welcomed Jack warmly. Mom had prepared her famous pot roast, and we all sat down to a lovely meal. The conversation flowed easily, with Jack charming my parents with stories about his work and his travels. The evening ended on a high note, with my parents pulling me aside as Jack went to get our coats. "He's wonderful, honey," Mom whispered, giving me a hug. "We're so happy for you." As Jack and I drove home, I couldn't help but bring up the subject of his parents again. "Jack, why haven't you introduced me to your family yet? Are you ashamed of me?" Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Of course not, Melissa. It's just, my parents can be a bit difficult. I want to make sure the timing is right." I sighed, not entirely satisfied with his answer, but decided to let it go for now. Our relationship continued to grow stronger over the next year and a half. Yet, the issue of his parents remained a sore spot. Every time I brought it up, Jack would find a way to change the subject or make light of the situation. I tried to be patient, to trust that he had his reasons, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. Then, on a crisp autumn evening, everything changed. Jack proposed to me at the restaurant, and I agreed to the sound of applause from other customers. On the drive home, still giddy with excitement, I turned to Jack. "I can't wait to tell my parents. They're going to be so thrilled." Jack smiled, but I noticed a hint of tension in his expression. "Actually, Mel, I think it's time you met my parents. How about we go see them this weekend?" I was surprised by the sudden change of heart, but delighted nonetheless. "Really? That would be wonderful, Jack." When we pulled up to Jack's childhood home, I couldn't help but gasp. The house was enormous, a sprawling mansion with manicured lawns and a fountain in the circular driveway. In the parking area, I spotted 3 luxury cars that probably cost more than my yearly salary. "Jack," I whispered, my eyes wide. "You never told me your family was, well, rich." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "It never seemed important. Come on, let's go in." As we approached the front door, it swung open to reveal a statuesque woman with perfectly coiffed hair and an expensive-looking suit. "Jack, darling," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. Her eyes fell on me, and I saw a flicker of something, disappointment, cross her face. "And you must be Melissa," she said, her tone noticeably cooler. "I'm Victoria, Jack's mother. Please, come in." We followed her into a lavish living room where Jack's father, Richard, was waiting. He greeted us warmly, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "So, you're the young lady who's stolen our Jack's heart," he said with a smile. Victoria gestured for us to sit and then began her interrogation. "So, Melissa, tell us about yourself. What do you do for a living?" "I'm a teacher at Jefferson Elementary," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I teach 3rd grade. Victoria's eyebrows rose. "A teacher? How quaint. And your family? What do they do?" I explained about my parents' occupations, watching as Victoria's expression grew more and more disapproving. By the time I finished, the atmosphere in the room was tense. Victoria smiled tightly. "Well, Melissa," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I must say, you're not quite what I had in mind for Jack. You're simply not the kind of girl I envisioned as a daughter-in-law." I felt as if I'd been slapped. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Richard cleared his throat. "Victoria, that's enough. Jack is old enough to make his own decisions about who he wants to marry." Victoria pursed her lips, but said nothing more. The rest of the visit passed in uncomfortable small talk until Jack and I made our excuses to leave. As we drove home in silence, I finally let the tears fall. "They hate me, don't they?" I choked out. Jack reached over and took my hand. "They don't hate you, Mel. My mother, she's just very particular. That's why I put off this meeting for so long. I'm sorry you had to go through that." In the months following our engagement, Jack and I threw ourselves into wedding planning. We wanted a small, intimate ceremony with just our closest friends and family. However, Victoria had other ideas. One afternoon, as Jack and I were discussing potential venues, my phone rang. It was Victoria. "Melissa, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I've been thinking about your wedding. I've taken the liberty of contacting some of the finest venues in the city. Oh, and I have a list of at least 100 guests we simply must invite." I felt my stomach drop. "That's very kind of you, Victoria, but Jack and I were hoping for something smaller." "Nonsense," she interrupted. "My son is getting married. It has to be a grand affair. I want all my friends to see how happy he is." The next day, we met with Victoria to discuss the wedding plans. Jack was firm, explaining that we wanted a small ceremony and couldn't afford an extravagant affair. Victoria's face turned cold. "I see. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps I should withdraw my offer to help. After all, it seems you two have it all figured out." Despite the tension, we stood our ground. In the end, we planned the wedding we wanted, a simple ceremony in a local park, followed by a reception at a charming restaurant. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. The ceremony was beautiful. Jack's eyes filled with tears as I walked down the aisle, and when we said our vows, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. During the toasts, Victoria stood up, glass in hand. My stomach clenched, dreading what she might say. "Well," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "This certainly isn't the wedding I envisioned for my son. But I suppose we must make do with what we have." A shocked murmur ran through the guests. Victoria continued, her words becoming increasingly critical of the simple decorations, the food, and even my dress. With each word, I felt smaller and more humiliated. Finally, she turned her gaze directly to me. "I must say, I'm not entirely comfortable in this company. I think it's best if I take my leave early." With that, she set down her glass and swept out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Our friends and family rallied around us, offering words of support and trying to lift the mood. Gradually, the party resumed, and by the end of the night, Victoria's dramatic exit was almost forgotten in the joy of celebration. After our honeymoon, Jack and I settled into married life in his apartment. However, my happiness was short-lived as Victoria began to make her presence felt in increasingly intrusive ways. One afternoon, I came home early from school to find Victoria in our living room, rearranging our furniture. I was shocked to see her there, especially since we hadn't given her a key. When Jack got home, I told him what had happened. He looked uncomfortable, but promised to talk to his mother about boundaries. However, Victoria's unexpected visits continued. She'd show up unannounced, always with some excuse about helping or checking on us. One day, as I was leaving for work, I overheard Victoria talking to our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, in the hallway. I stopped short when I heard my name. "You know, you really should keep an eye on Melissa," Victoria was saying in a low voice. "She comes from a less desirable area. One can never be too careful with their jewelry." Over the next few weeks, I noticed a change in how some of our neighbors treated me. Friendly smiles were replaced with wary glances, and casual conversations in the elevator became awkward silences. It was clear that Victoria's words had had an effect. That evening, I broke down in tears as I told Jack what I'd overheard. He was angry and immediately confronted his mother, demanding she return the spare key she'd somehow obtained. Victoria's response was to play the victim, accusing me of turning her son against her. She began posting thinly veiled criticisms of me on social media, never mentioning me by name but making it clear who she was talking about. Then, one day, I was called into the principal's office at school. Mr. Thompson, my boss, looked uncomfortable as he slid an envelope across his desk to me. "Melissa, we received this, complaint about you," he said, his voice kind but concerned. Normally, we don't put much stock in anonymous letters, but given the nature of the accusations, I felt I should bring it to your attention. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and read the letter. It was a litany of false accusations, everything from theft to inappropriate behavior with students. My mind reeled. There was only one person who could be behind this, Victoria. Mr. Thompson assured me he didn't believe the accusations, but warned me that rumors had started circulating among some of the staff. As I left his office, I could feel the stares of my colleagues, hear the whispers behind my back. As the months passed, what should have been joyous family gatherings turned into nightmarish ordeals. Every holiday, every family dinner became an opportunity for Victoria to belittle and humiliate me in front of Jack's friends and relatives. The breaking point came at a party Victoria hosted at her home. I'd worn a simple white skirt, feeling pretty and confident for once. As the evening wore on, I noticed people giving me odd looks and snickering behind their hands. It wasn't until Jack arrived late and pulled me aside that I learned the horrifying truth. "Mel," he said, his face a mix of anger and embarrassment, "there's a huge red stain on the back of your skirt. It looks like ketchup." My cheeks burned with humiliation as I realized I'd been walking around all evening with this stain, completely unaware. But worse was to come. Victoria, it seemed, had been busy taking photos of me throughout the night, always angled to prominently display the stain. By the time we got home, these photos were all over social media, accompanied by Victoria's mocking comments. The next day at school was a nightmare. Some of my students had seen the photos, and I could hear their whispered jokes and giggles. It took all my strength not to break down in tears in front of my class. That evening, I told Jack I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm done with these family gatherings," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't keep subjecting myself to your mother's cruelty." To my relief, Jack agreed. "You're right, Mel. We'll stop attending. My mother's behavior is unacceptable." Amidst this turmoil, I discovered I was pregnant. For a brief, shining moment, I hoped this news might soften Victoria's heart. Perhaps the prospect of a grandchild would bring peace to our fractured family. I couldn't have been more wrong. Victoria's reaction to the news was chilling. "Are you sure it's Jack's?" she asked, her voice dripping with insinuation. "After all, you two haven't been around much lately. Who knows what you've been up to?" I was stunned by her accusation, but I soon realized it was more than just cruel words. I began to notice a car following me on my way to and from work. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but the same nondescript sedan kept appearing wherever I went. Shaken, I called the police. To my shock, when they tracked down and questioned the man, he admitted he was a private detective hired by Victoria to follow me. She had convinced herself that I was cheating on Jack and that the baby wasn't his. When Jack found out, he was livid. He confronted his mother in a heated phone call that I could hear from across the room. Victoria, caught red-handed, had no choice but to call off the detective. Months passed, and soon it was time for our baby to arrive. The delivery was long and difficult, but when I finally held our son in my arms, all the pain melted away. However, as I looked at him, I noticed something unexpected. Our beautiful baby boy had a much darker complexion than either Jack or me. He looked almost biracial. A seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. Would Jack think I'd been unfaithful? Before he could voice any suspicions, I insisted on a DNA test. The wait for the results was agonizing, but finally, we got the news: Jack was indeed our son's biological father. The doctor, seeing our confusion, suggested another possibility. "It's possible this trait comes from one of your parents. We could do DNA tests on them as well, to trace the genetic line." My parents, when approached with the idea, were calm and agreeable. They understood our confusion and were happy to help solve the mystery. But the thought of telling Victoria made my blood run cold. Given her past accusations and behavior, I feared how she might react to this news. Would she use this as ammunition in her ongoing campaign against me? As I cradled our beautiful, mysterious baby boy, I looked at Jack. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack took my hand, his eyes full of love and determination. "We're going to love our son, no matter what. And we'll get to the bottom of this. Together." The day Victoria first saw her grandson should have been a joyous occasion. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. As soon as she laid eyes on our beautiful baby boy, her face contorted with shock and disgust. "What is this?" she shrieked, recoiling from the crib. "This child is too dark. He can't be Jack's." Before I could even respond, she rounded on me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You whore! You cheated on my son with some black guy from the alley, didn't you?" "Victoria, please," I begged, tears welling in my eyes. "We've done a DNA test. Jack is the father. I've never been unfaithful." But she was beyond reason. She stormed out of our apartment, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few hours later, when I returned from a quick errand, I found all of my belongings strewn across the hallway outside our apartment. Clothes, books, even my underwear, all scattered on the floor for anyone to see. I stood there, shocked and humiliated, as neighbors peeked out of their doors to see what the commotion was about. Jack was livid when he came home and saw what his mother had done. He immediately called her, putting her on speakerphone so I could hear. "Mom, this has to stop," he shouted. "We've done a DNA test. I am the father." Melissa has never cheated on me. Victoria's voice was cold and dismissive. DNA tests can be faked. I know what I see. We even had my parents take DNA tests, which confirmed their relationship to our son. But Victoria refused to listen to reason. When we suggested she and Jack's father take tests as well, she categorically refused. Victoria's obsession only grew worse over time. She began calling me from unknown numbers, leaving threatening voicemails. "Admit you cheated, or I'll destroy both your careers," she hissed in one particularly chilling message. She sent compromising letters to both Jack's workplace and my school. The stress became so overwhelming that I had to quit my job and find a position at another school across town. But even that wasn't enough. Victoria's campaign of harassment escalated. She planted threatening letters in our mailbox. She even went so far as to hire actors to harass me in public, taking photos of these staged encounters and sending them to Jack as proof of my infidelity. One night, as we lay in bed, both too stressed to sleep, I turned to Jack. "I'm worried about your mother," I whispered. "This behavior, it's not normal. I think she might need help." Jack nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing. But she'd never agree to see someone." The next day, I decided to reach out to Jack's father, Richard. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. Over coffee, I poured out everything that had been happening, the harassment, the threats, the elaborate schemes Victoria had concocted. Richard listened, his face growing more and more concerned. When I finished, he sat back with a heavy sigh. "I've noticed changes in her behavior," he admitted. "But I had no idea it had gotten this bad." "You're right, she needs help. But she'd never agree to see a psychiatrist willingly." We spent the next hour brainstorming how we could get Victoria the help she clearly needed without her knowing. Richard's plan was simple, but effective. Under the guise of changing insurance providers, he convinced Victoria to undergo a comprehensive health checkup at a new clinic. To our surprise, she agreed without much fuss. The day of the examination arrived, and we all waited anxiously for the results. When they came, they were more shocking than any of us could have imagined. Victoria was diagnosed with a complex mental illness, one that was genetically transmitted through the female line in her family. The doctor explained that without early intervention, the women in her family tended to experience severe mental health deterioration as they aged. Victoria's erratic behavior and obsessive actions were symptoms of this progressive condition. The news hit us all hard, but it also brought a sense of relief. There was a reason for Victoria's actions, a medical explanation for the torment she had put us through. With the diagnosis came a treatment plan, and Victoria was admitted to a specialized clinic for care. But the revelations didn't stop there. Richard, in an attempt to understand the genetic components of Victoria's condition, decided to undergo genetic testing himself. The results shook our family to its core. Richard was not Jack's biological father. When Richard shared this news with us, the pieces suddenly fell into place. It wasn't me who had been unfaithful, it was Victoria, years ago, with a man of African descent. The very thing she had accused me of, she had done herself. I expected anger or resentment from Richard, but his reaction surprised me. He looked at Jack with tears in his eyes and said, "Son, I may not be your biological father, but I raised you. I loved you from the moment you were born, and nothing will ever change that. You are my son in every way that matters." Jack hugged his father tightly, affirming that Richard was and always would be his dad. As for his biological father, Jack decided he had no interest in searching for him. "The man who raised me, who stood by me through everything, that's my real father," he declared. With Victoria receiving the care she needed and the truth finally out in the open, a sense of peace settled over our family. Richard, free from Victoria's influence, became a doting grandfather to our son. He would spend hours playing with him, marveling at his curly black hair and striking blue eyes. One evening, as we sat in the living room of Richard's spacious house, he made an unexpected proposal. "Why don't you all move in here?" he suggested. "This place is too big for just me, and I'd love to have my family close." Jack and I exchanged glances, then smiled. It felt right, like the beginning of a new chapter for all of us. We agreed, and within a few weeks, we had moved into Richard's home. Life settled into a new, happier rhythm. Our son grew into a handsome, swarthy boy, his mixed heritage evident in his features. But to us, and to everyone who knew our family story, his appearance was simply a part of who he was, a beautiful, loved child. Victoria remained in the clinic, receiving the care she needed. While we didn't visit often, we made sure she was comfortable and well treated. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was one we could live with.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look, "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day." Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. "So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, what's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.